Hi, Session 10 of Egan Matrix programming for the Haken Continuum. Today I want to talk about using the continuum as a digital signal processor for analog audio input. Unfortunately, the continuum doesn't take analog audio input, so we have to convert it to the digital format, AES input format, that the continuum does support. Now this can be a little tricky if you don't have an A to D or D to A converter that's required to do the job. Some preamps actually can convert directly to AES output that you can feed into your continuum. That would be lucky if you had one of those. If not, you're going to have to get yourself an A to D DDA converter to do this job. Now what I use is the Behringer Ultramatch Pro converter, which is extremely cost effective for what it does in comparison to other converters, which can cost thousands of dollars. So of course to some extent you get what you pay for, but I found that this Behringer converter is an excellent product for the application we're using it in here. So let's just take a little bit of a look first on how I do it. You can set things up differently, of course. This is a little busy chart here that kind of shows you how I'm using the continuum right now. But then a couple of things we're going to be interested in is number one, getting an analog signal into my continuum. I'm going to use a Theremin for this presentation because I'm interested in that. And I've found that the continuum makes an excellent external processor for a Theremin. So what we'll do is take the Theremin analog input, or this could be any analog input that you're working with. I throw that through a preamp and send that signal into the analog input of my converter. And the converter will do its job and convert that analog signal into an AES digital output that I will connect right up to the continuum. Now these take an XLR-like cable, and the only thing you have to be a little concerned with is just taking any old XLR audio cable off your shelf may not give you the best results here. You really want to get a cable that is geared for digital signals. So if you don't have one, they're not that expensive. I suggest you go and get one of those to use in this application. Then once I have that signal going into my continuum, I can bring up the editor and start playing around. I also can channel the AES output of the continuum into my converter and convert that to an analog audio that I can then send to my mixer or my digital audio workstation, do anything I want. For what we're doing here, I'm actually going to take the stereo output on the continuum itself that I feed through a little converter to get mono and left and right channels into a mixer, then into a digital audio interface to my laptop to do the job we're doing here. Also, what I'm going to use for this video is a breath controller that will allow me to turn the volume easily on and off of the Theremin so you don't go crazy with that sound always in the background. Later on, maybe I'll do a video on some other things like using these breath controllers with the Theremin and the continuum in a little more detail than the simple video I made before. And you can also do other things like throwing other MIDI controllers that can help you out for continuum control, like a foot controller. That's probably another video too. So now that we know how the thing is set up, let's go to the Egan Matrix patch that I've created. You can see not much here. First thing we want to do is go to the cogwheel and MIDI and global settings, and just verify that your AES setting is matching whatever your converter has. Now the Continuum supports 24-bit digital audio, but you can change the output frequency from 96 kilohertz to 48 kilohertz, or sync it to the incoming signal. The input frequency is set at 96 kilohertz, so make sure your converter is set 24 bits 96 kilohertz, and you shouldn't have any problem here. You can also see on this the MIDI editor that I have my breath controller connected and set up. So if I blow on my controller, you'll hear the Theremin kick in. Now let's take a look at how to use this AES input. On the left-hand side on my input sections, I have an AES option that can be set to either AES left and right, to taps, or a combination of AES and taps. But we're just going to use the basic AES input here. Now what I've done, since I have a monophonic Theremin signal going into my system, and the way I've set it up, it basically is coming out on the left, mostly on the left channel. So I'm going to route both the left channel input to both the main left and right outputs, so that when I play something, you won't hear it just on the left channel. Simple. I've just taken the inputs, routed that unity signal right to the outputs with no other programming going on. The only other thing is this function that I've set up so that I can use my breath controller as a volume modulator. And if I take just a simple look at that formula, I have a constant that I set from 0 to 1 that's being routed and controlled by the first barrel. That barrel is then controlled by my breath controller, which I've set up so that it uses the MIDI continuous control value of 12, which is what is used to control barrel 1. 13, 14, and 15 CCs are used to control barrels 2, 3, and 4. And if you look into the Egan Matrix manual, you'll see that almost all these controls can be controlled by some CC function that's been defined. Actually, I think it's defined in the main Continuum manual, not the Egan Matrix manual. Now, okay, as I blow, now you'll see the volume increase, and the first thing I'll want to do is turn down the recirculator, because I don't want to have any reverb for the initial demonstration, which is controlled by this main reverb function basically. And then the next thing I want to make sure is that my AES input is set to a value that I like, because if I blow now, you can hear it, but if I set the AES input to minimum, obviously no volume is going to come out. So I'll set my AES input to some value, not too high. And I can also set my main gain accordingly. So I'll get a volume that I'm happy with. And now when I play, because the recirculator is totally at minimum, I have a very dry signal, pretty much what your Theremin would sound like if you routed it right to an amp. So let's bring up our recirculator and get rid of our formula, and then we can see the recirculator controls at the bottom right hand side, and these take effect right on the outputs. I don't have to do any programming to actually use them, though there are some options that can program these, but we won't need that for what we're doing here. So let's start with reasonable decay, about half the total amount, and I'll turn my damping down, because if I turn my damping up too much, it will have the effect of turning off the reverb. And my darkness and diffusion settings, I found that for the Theremin, these don't really have too much of an effect. I can set them to something low. And now, if I turn up my recirculator, I should have a little bit of reverb going on. And you can hear I have a reasonable amount. I can turn up my damping way high, and that will kind of deaden everything. And turn it up all the way. Obviously, that's almost like turning off the reverb. So I want some, I don't want too much damping, a little bit of decay. And now if I want, I can actually turn this way up, the master mix, and I'll get much more reverberation. And if I turn up the delay high and turn that damping way down, now I'm going to get big reverb. And you can play around with those to your heart's content. Obviously, there's a lot of possible settings here to let you get just the right amount of reverb for your Theremin playing. Another thing we can do is try out some of the other recirculator options. So instead of digital reverb, let's try modulated delay. And we'll just use the default settings here. Okay. Swept echo. Nice. There's a lot of feedback there. If I turn that feedback down, obviously. I'm not going to get that major reverberative sound. All right. Swept echo. Analog echo. Oh, you could play around all day doing this. And then there's some options that have a digital echo with low pass and high pass filters turned on that it will sound similar, but I have Theory's module installed here so I can get those nice low notes out. Thank you, Theory. So now let's do something different. Obviously, we can play around here a lot more and get just the right reverb you're looking for almost any application. Let's go on to something new. Let's use the Theremin as a modulating source now. To do this, why didn't this do anything? Let's open it up again. Sometimes I notice when I bring up files in the editor, nothing happens and I have to bring them up a second time. Not sure what that's all about. All right, so now I'm using the Theremin input. I'm only going to use the left input here, directly feeding the modulating input of an oscillator. That oscillator I've set to a kilohertz, and I haven't used any waveform change, so it's going to default to a sine wave, which is its 0 setting. And I'm routing now oscillator 1 out, not the AES inputs, because I'm using those as an input to some other function in the matrix. All right, now we're going to hear a real different sound. It's going to be a modulated sound, but because I have this really audible 1 kilohertz tone as the master oscillator's frequency, you'll hear that in the background. That's almost a science fiction-like sound. That might actually sound better as an analog echo. And you can see how you can play around here with all these different functions. Let's go back to digital reverb. All right, let's take that oscillator down a decade and make it a 0.1. So now we've got a 100 hertz tone. You can kind of hear that the tone now is much lower, the whole thing. Let's maybe bring up a little more reverb. All right, now let's take it down another tenth. Okay, so now we have 10 hertz. And you can hear that now I've got a modulation, 10 times a second. That's what that kind of jittering sound is doing for us. And if I take it down 1/10 more, 0, 0, 1. Now I'm totally in a low frequency oscillation mode. It's a non-audible tone. That's actually the modulator of the theremin is modulating this low frequency tone, but it's basically going to sound like my theremin tone is being modulated by this LFO. You can hear that wah, 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 wah going on there. Let's go down another decade. 0.0001. All right, now we're at such a low tone that it's the theremin itself is going to come out. It's going to sound like a kind of a modulated old style theremin that has that kind of buzzing sound. Nice. It's so low, in fact, if I just sit on the tone, You can hear a little bit of motion, but in effect, what I've done here through this modulation is kind of turn my theremin into a totally different timbre, which to me is exciting because now maybe I can use all kinds of different theremins and turn them into different instruments. Enough for modulation. We could also have combined that with all the other functions that we had before. And of course, this isn't the end here. I could take this oscillator and feed that instead of to the outputs. I could feed that as a modulating source into another oscillator, or feed that as a source into one of the filter banks. The things I can do here are almost endless. All right. Next up, let's play around with our Biquad filter. Now, the Bic mouth is a Formant generator that's going to give me something kind of like the talking machine, only I have much more control over it. What I've done here is basically just set up a default setting, and in addition to routing the theremin into this Formant filter, I've also taken the output of that filter and I've sent some of that into a voice delay. All right. Now, voice delay is very easy to use. You just feed an audio input into it. You turn on some amount that you want to use here with delay time equals 0, none for 0, and 1 for max delay. So I want the max delay, which is what I'll have here, of 100 milliseconds. And what I'll do is I'll take the output of that, which is C, and I'll throw some of that to the outputs as well. I don't know why it's... I won't throw the full unity amount because I don't want as much delay as main sound. I want some fraction of delay coming out. And now I actually have some things set up here we don't need. So hopefully when I play now, simple to use, that Formant generator. And one of the things I can do with it is, set some kind of control up. Here what I've done is the actual Formant type that I'm using is controlled by the pedal. So I've set my pedal to control, as you can see, the second barrel, and then I've set up a formula here that goes from 0 to 3.6, which is about, I think, the max value that the Formant type can take. And so now I can change very easily that Formant sound. I don't want to actually do it constantly when I'm playing because there's glitches that can happen there. You can hear that. Now you can use that as an effect, but what I want to do is change this when I'm not playing, so I can start with the bass ah sound and then change it to something. Again, change. Oh, well, you can play around here, do all kinds of things. I just want to give you a little taste of what's going on. Next up. Now let's play around with the Biquad bank of filters. I have some things set up here that let's see. All right. So we can set some things up. You can see I have the analog echo here set. I can, if I change that to say, oh, actually, if I change it to digital reverb, it's going to overload. But let's change to say a swept delay. And I can do all kinds of things with this a Biquad bank of filters with these parameter settings, but to be honest, that's pretty much a video in and of itself to go over those functions. I just kind of want to give you a basic idea of all the different kinds of things that you can use this for on an analog input. So we've looked at a few different ways to manipulate these audio inputs, but to be honest, we've only really scratched the surface here. If you look at the matrix, you'll see the little black triangles. These indicate things that you can send an audio input to. So my suggestion to you, if you want to start playing around with this, is to initially send that AES input into one of the modules that can take the audio inputs, and they can be the oscillator modulations, they can be filter inputs. These Biquad banks of filters can take audio inputs. But if you really want to have some fun and experiment, one of the things you can do is take some of the preset patches and fool around adding audio inputs into them, and you can get some very interesting effects and other things going on that you might not even have thought possible by playing around like this. Let's end by just taking one example. I was playing around with a number of these, and Transporter's one that's kind of fun. It's kind of meant to, I think, simulate a Star Trek transporter kind of sound. And all right, you can do that, and after about 2 seconds, I think I get it, and I don't know that I want to do much more with it. But what if we ask ourselves, let's experiment and see if we can add a theremin to this somehow. So I created my own little version of this. Let's open that up. AES transporter, and what I did here is I separated out the taps. If you remember, this can either be an AES input, a tap, or an AES and a tap. So I kind of made it the combination of tap and AES input, and it kind of kept the programming for the taps there. I removed the programming that was there already for the initial tap, and I took the AES inputs and I channeled them in addition to the A module going into these filters, which is this a wave bank of sawtooth waves. I also sent in to the filters my Theremin signal. And so whatever was going on with the sawtooth waves into those filters, the Theremin signal is going to be processed in a similar way. And the only other thing I did is I created another formula M here that I attached to my breath controller through a barrel again, so that I could manipulate everything with my breath. Now I did that for this M formula on both the main outputs, but I also did it on the secondary outputs that get that you can use before the mains for various things. So now everything is basically controlled by my breath. However, we have to realize that this patch was meant to be played on the fingerboard. So now, for the first time, I'm actually going to use the fingerboard and the theremin at the same time. And because this is more of an effect, and I'm not trying to do precision melody playing, it's going to be perfectly acceptable, I think. So let's see what happens to the sound. There was my original transporter sound, but now I've turned up the AES input, you can see here, and that's going to feed my theremin into this mix as well when I start playing that. And that last sound you heard, of course, is not the Continuum fingerboard. That's my theremin being manipulated in the same kind of fashion that the fingerboard is in this patch. So you can see I've got many preset patches that I can fool around with this way, and I've managed to get some really interesting sounds out of them. And of course, once you have these patches set up here, you can reprogram them and add things to them, and the sky's the limit. I find that the Continuum is an excellent digital signal processor for analog inputs. Certainly there are a lot of other things you can do in that realm, like an Eventide H9. That's an excellent processor that can be used with the theremin to create all kinds of interesting effects as well. But I really enjoy using the Continuum in this manner. So I think that's enough. You're probably bored to death by now. And maybe we'll go into a little more of this at some point on how to better use the theremin in this regard as a melodic instrument. But I think that's enough for today. So till the next time.